taller. Y nuevamente bienvenides. Mi nombre es Dinora Martínez, mi pronombre es ella y les damos la más cordial bienvenida a este espacio donde tendremos una charla muy práctica para tener un mejor entendimiento sobre la Corte Suprema, sobre algunas de sus funciones y procesos, pero sobre todo queremos informar a la comunidad la verdad de cómo los políticos buscan seguir interfiriendo con los ataques hacia el acceso al derecho humano fundamental del aborto seguro, legal y asequible. En Latina Institute creemos que cada persona tiene derecho a decidir si quiere ser madre, padre y cuándo. Durante todo el embarazo, la salud y el bienestar de una persona deben guiar las decisiones médicas importantes, no los políticos ni las cortes. Cuando las personas pueden tomar decisiones que son mejores para sus vidas, las familias prosperan y construimos comunidades donde cada uno de nosotros puede participar con dignidad e igualdad. Ahora voy a presentarles a mi colega que el día de hoy nos acompaña en este espacio y quien nos compartirá información más específica de los casos de la Corte, que la Corte Suprema está decidiendo ahora para tener un mejor entendimiento de cómo estas decisiones impactan a nuestras comunidades latinex. Así que es un gusto y un placer presentarles a mi colega Seilen Andrew. Seilen trabaja con Latina Institute como asociada política en el equipo de relaciones gubernamentales. Ella se une a la familia de Latina Institute después de dar un giro en su carrera, pasando de las comunicaciones a la política pública y la defensa. En mayo del 2022 completó su maestría en la Escuela Fletcher de Derecho y Diplomacia, donde se centró en cuestiones de política a través de la igualdad de género, la justicia racial y la seguridad humana. Seilen trabajó durante una década en varias agencias de publicidad de Nueva York. En sus primeros años desempeñó funciones de gestión de cuentas antes de pasar a la estrategia creativa. Durante ese tiempo fue responsable de dirigir las comunicaciones estratégicas de una serie de marcas nacionales e internacionales como Mercedes-Benz, Crayola, Verizon y Audi. Se siente muy emocionada y honrada de aportar sus conocimientos de investigación, redacción y gestión a una organización como Latina Institute que está comprometida con el cambio positivo. Bienvenida, Seilen. Bien, ahora que ya conocen al equipo de Latina Institute, nos gustaría saber de ustedes. Si se sienten cómodas, compartir en el chat su nombre, pronombre, el estado de donde nos están visitando y qué es lo que te trajo a este espacio. Pueden poner sus respuestas en el chat, por favor. En lo que se animan las personas a poner sus respuestas en el chat, quiero compartir quiénes somos, qué hacemos, qué hace Latina Institute. Oops. I don't know what's going on. Ok, somos el Instituto Nacional de Latinas para la Justicia Reproductiva. Fue fundado en 1994, por lo que estamos orgullosamente cumpliendo 30 años de ser parte del movimiento por la justicia reproductiva. Este 2024 estamos celebrando nuestro aniversario número 30 de luchar por la salud, dignidad y justicia para todos. Luchamos por la igualdad de acceso a la salud reproductiva para las comunidades latinas, latinex, y somos una organización nacional con sede en Nueva York, oficinas en DC, Florida, Texas y en Virginia. En Latina Institute creemos que cada persona tiene derecho a decidir si quiere ser madre y cuándo. A lo largo, como decíamos, de un embarazo, la salud y el bienestar de una persona, no los políticos ni los tribunales, deben guiar las decisiones médicas importantes. Ahora, para poder avanzar en la lucha por la justicia reproductiva, Latina Institute se ha enfocado en 4 áreas que se cruzan, a las cuales llamamos sweet spot o punto óptimo. Estas áreas son la justicia reproductiva, salud y derechos reproductivos, la justicia y derechos de inmigrantes, las libertades y derechos civiles y la justicia económica. Mientras los políticos antiaborto se apresuran a prohibir o restringir el acceso al aborto, vemos que la gente en todo el país está energizada y contraatacando los esfuerzos por quitarnos la libertad de tomar nuestras propias decisiones sobre nuestros cuerpos y nuestras vidas. Sabemos que la mayoría de las personas en este país, incluyendo los latinos, latinex, apoyan el acceso a los servicios de aborto y no quieren que políticos extremistas prohíban el aborto e interfieran con sus decisiones personales de salud. Esos números solo han aumentado desde que la Corte Suprema anuló Roe v. Wade. Pero para poder tener más contexto de lo que estamos hablando, comenzaremos repasando alguna información muy básica sobre la Corte Suprema. ¿Qué es la Corte Suprema? La Corte Suprema de los Estados Unidos es el más alto tribunal federal y tiene la última palabra sobre las apelaciones de los tribunales federales de circuito. A menudo se le conoce por el acrónimo de SCOTUS. Se encuentra en DC y es la cabeza del Poder Judicial del gobierno federal y es responsable de decidir si las leyes violan la Constitución. Sesiona desde principios de octubre hasta finales de junio o principios de julio. ¿Y quiénes conforman la Corte Suprema? La Corte Suprema está constituida por 9 jueces, un presidente del Tribunal Supremo que se sienta en el centro y es el jefe del Poder Judicial, y hay 8 jueces asociados que son nombrados por el presidente de los Estados Unidos y confirmados por el Consejo y consentimiento del Senado de los Estados Unidos. ¿Y qué tipo de casos examina la Corte Suprema? La Corte Suprema tiene una amplia jurisdicción y puede revisar una variedad de tipos de casos. Cada año, el tribunal recibe entre 7,000 y 8,000 solicitudes de revisión y concede entre 70 y 80 para la argumentación oral. Otras solicitudes se conceden y se deciden sin argumentos. Y algunos de los tipos de casos más comunes que examina la Corte son los casos federales. Estos casos involucran disputas que surgen de la ley federal o la Constitución de los Estados Unidos. Por ejemplo, la Corte Suprema puede revisar casos que involucran leyes federales sobre impuestos, comercio o derechos civiles. El otro tipo de casos son los casos estatales. En algunos casos, la Corte Suprema puede revisar decisiones de tribunales estatales más altos si esas decisiones involucran una cuestión federal. Por ejemplo, la Corte Suprema puede revisar un caso decidido por un tribunal estatal más alto si ese caso involucra la interpretación de la Constitución de los Estados Unidos. Y otros casos, tenemos también casos de diversidad. Por ejemplo, estos casos involucran disputas entre ciudadanos de diferentes estados. La Corte Suprema tiene jurisdicción original sobre estos casos, lo que significa que es el primer tribunal en escuchar el caso. También están las peticiones de certiorari. Una petición de certiorari es una solicitud a la Corte Suprema para que revise una decisión de un tribunal inferior. La Corte Suprema solo acepta revisar una pequeña fracción de las peticiones de certiorari que recibe. Y los casos de emergencia. La Corte Suprema también puede escuchar casos de emergencia en los que haya una necesidad inmediata de resolver una disputa legal. Por ejemplo, la Corte Suprema ha escuchado casos de emergencia relacionados con elecciones y campañas políticas. Es importante tener en cuenta que esta no es una lista exhaustiva de todos los tipos de casos que examina la Corte Suprema. La Corte tiene un poder judicial amplio y puede revisar cualquier caso que involucre una cuestión federal. ¿Y cómo llega un caso a la Corte Suprema? Entendemos que este no es un tema muy sexy, que digamos, que estamos escuchando términos muy técnicos y que el proceso en sí de cómo un caso llega a la Corte Suprema puede ser largo y muy complejo. Así que trataremos de explicar el proceso de la manera más sencilla para finalmente entender cómo las decisiones de la Corte Suprema impactan directamente o indirectamente en la salud, dignidad y justicia de la comunidad latina, Latinx. El proceso inicia con la demanda inicial. Imaginemos que Juana, una ciudadana estadounidense, es despedida de su trabajo sin motivo aparente. Juana comienza su viaje legal en la Corte Estatal. Presenta su demanda alegando que su despido fue inconstitucional. La Corte Estatal celebra un juicio donde ambas partes presentan sus argumentos y pruebas. Al final, el juez estatal dictamina a favor de la empresa, indicando que el despido de Juana estaba justificado. Entonces, ¿qué sigue? Decidida a luchar por sus derechos, Juana apela la decisión del Tribunal Estatal ante la Corte Federal de Apelaciones. Aquí se revisa el fallo del Tribunal Estatal para verificar si se cometieron errores legales o si se interpretó la ley de manera incorrecta. Ahora, supongamos que la Corte Federal de Apelaciones también falla en contra de Juana. Ella no se va a rendir. Entonces, su siguiente paso y el último recurso dentro del sistema judicial es presentar una petición de certiorari ante la Corte Suprema de los Estados Unidos. Si la Corte Suprema acepta su caso, Juana y la empresa presentarán sus argumentos y alegatos ante los jueces durante una audiencia oral. Y finalmente, la Corte Suprema emitirá una decisión final determinando si el despido de Juana fue legal o no. Su decisión tendrá un impacto significativo en la ley y podría afectar casos similares en todo el país. Ahora, después de este ejemplo del proceso de cómo un caso llega a la Corte Suprema, podremos entender mejor cómo funciona este mismo proceso en el ámbito de los derechos y la salud reproductiva y su impacto en nuestras vidas. Los políticos antiabortistas nunca iban a detenerse en Dobbs. 2 años después, han vuelto a la Corte Suprema con otros 2 casos que pondrán la atención al aborto aún más fuera del alcance de nuestras comunidades. Estos ataques contra el aborto continuarán como parte de su objetivo final de prohibir el aborto en todo el país. Entonces, Salem, ¿cuáles son los 2 casos que el Tribunal Supremo ha revisado este año relacionados con el acceso al aborto? Le paso el micrófono a mi colega Salem.
Thank you for that question, Dinora. So in June, the United States Supreme Court, or as we often call it, SCOTUS, decided on two cases that are related to abortion access. One is the FDA versus Alliance for Hippocratic Medicine, which has to do with medication abortion. And the other is actually two cases that got rolled into one that have to do with emergency care. Those cases are called Idaho versus United States and Moyle versus the United States. So in the FDA versus Alliance for Hippocratic Medicine case, the initial complaint came back in November of 2022, when a group of anti-abortion physicians sued the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, in Amarillo, Texas, over the FDA's approval of mifepristone, which is one of two medications most commonly used in medication abortion in the United States. Mifepristone, when taken along with another drug, misoprostol, is known as medication abortion care, which is an FDA-approved option for ending an early pregnancy. It's been used for more than 20 years in the United States by millions of people and has been shown to be very safe and effective. So much so that medication abortion care now accounts for nearly 2/3 of abortion care received in the US. The FDA has improved that access to abortion care by updating its guidelines for medication abortion to allow for virtual consultations, also known as telehealth, and allowing certified brick and mortar or mail order pharmacies to dispense the medication. Despite the fact that mifepristone has been used by millions of people, the anti-abortion physicians were challenging these improvements made by the FDA. The way that this case made it to the Supreme Court is that the original lawsuit was filed in a federal district court in Texas in 2022. The FDA lost that case, so they appealed to the Federal Circuit Court in 2023. That's a higher court. The FDA lost again in the circuit court, so then they submitted a petition to the Supreme Court requesting that SCOTUS review the case. Last December, SCOTUS agreed to review the case. Both sides in the case were able to then make arguments in front of the Supreme Court this past March. And the good news is that on June 13th, 2024, SCOTUS unanimously ruled that the anti-abortion physicians do not have the legal right, which is known as standing, to challenge the FDA's actions related to the approval of mifepristone. And this decision means that mifepristone will remain on the market and accessible in states where abortion is legal. However, the fight doesn't stop here. This attack on medication abortion could continue, as the case will be sent back down to the federal district court judge in Texas, who has already allowed other states to join in on the case. The other Supreme Court case that I want to share with you is about whether states can deny pregnant people the emergency abortion care that they urgently need. The cases have to do with something that's called the Emergency Medical Treatment and Labor Act, which is long, so we often say EMTALA, which is the acronym. EMTALA is a nearly 40-year-old federal law guaranteeing everyone treatment for emergency medical conditions nationwide. Under EMTALA, hospitals must provide the treatment that's necessary to stabilize emergency medical conditions. And for some people, that means ending a pregnancy. This law has always protected pregnant people in medical emergencies and required emergency abortion care for those who need it. Without the protections of this law, a hospital could refuse to treat a pregnant person experiencing a medical emergency, such as their water breaking dangerously early, sepsis, or preeclampsia, among many others. So if you can believe it, Idaho violated this law. The Biden administration therefore sued Idaho, and the Supreme Court dismissed the case on the grounds that the court never should have taken the case in the first place. This means that for now, Idaho providers must provide emergency care for pregnant patients who need an abortion. However, like the medication abortion case, this dismissal means that the Idaho case will continue in the lower courts, and confusion about the law will continue to put pregnant people at risk in Idaho and in other states. A very similar case out of Texas, or even this case, could be before the Supreme Court again as soon as next year.
Wow. And Celine, how are these two cases related?
Absolutely, they're very related. These cases represent the first major abortion cases the Supreme Court has reviewed since the devastating Dobbs ruling. And they prove that that Dobbs decision is resulting in more legal battles on abortion, not fewer. Anti-abortion politicians were never going to stop at Dobbs. 2 years after the Supreme Court overturned Roe versus Wade, they came back to the Supreme Court trying to push abortion care even further out of reach for our communities.
Wow. So,
oh, sorry, I was just pausing.
sorry.
Just to give a little space. So, both of these cases are part of the anti-abortion movement strategy to keep chipping away at abortion access until they ban abortion care across the country. These cases are also part of the movement's overall strategy to create confusion and fear. So if you're confused by all this, don't feel badly. That's exactly their intention. We're seeing different anti-abortion actors from all different places using a similar strategy to weaponize the chaos that the Dobbs decision has unleashed to instill more fear and confusion among patients and providers in this country. And unfortunately, the opposition's efforts will continue until we have clear federal protections for abortion that include access. In both cases, the Supreme Court chose to dismiss the cases rather than make a ruling on the content of the cases. Unfortunately, this leaves the door open to revisiting both emergency abortion access and abortion pill regulation as early as next year. For example, in the EMTALA case, what the Supreme Court should have done is made clear that EMTALA includes emergency abortion care and preempts abortion bans everywhere, which means that the federal law of EMTALA takes precedence when it conflicts with a state ban. This would have ensured that every pregnant patient, no matter where they live, would be able to get the emergency care they need, including abortion.
Yeah, and the next question is, how do they impact our communities?
Absolutely. So, as I mentioned earlier, the Supreme Court dismissed both cases. For medication abortion, what this means is that access to mifepristone remains unchanged, including access via telehealth. So it is still available and legal to access and use in states where abortion is legal. And when it comes to medical emergencies, abortion does remain included in emergency care for pregnant people. So while we're really relieved that the Supreme Court dismissed the cases, the fight is far from over. Neither of these cases should have made it this far in the courts. Unfortunately, we know that these attacks on abortion care will only continue as part of an agenda to ban abortion nationwide, and the impact will fall hardest on Latinas and Latinxes. These legal challenges do incredible damage to Latinx communities. They cause confusion, fear, and uncertainty about abortion care, which makes it much easier for misinformation to spread. And it also deters people from actually getting the care that they need, especially Latinas and Latinxes who are already the most affected by abortion bans in this country. An October 2023 report that Latina Institute helped publish confirmed that the Supreme Court's decision to overturn Roe versus Wade has devastated the country. And that report found that Latinas are the largest group of women of color who are living under current or likely abortion bans. Texas women, for example, are now having to travel an average of 7 hours out of state to obtain an abortion. This means that Texans are traveling an average of 500 miles to seek abortion care. So healthcare, which is a human right, is becoming even further inaccessible. And the same challenges are true for immigrant communities and their access to healthcare. Immigrants, especially undocumented folks and those in mixed status families, are particularly vulnerable to the harmful impacts of abortion restrictions due to their unique barriers and the increased risk that they face of criminalization based on their immigration status. So many of the states that are passing anti-abortion laws are also home to a high number of immigrant and mixed status families, such as Texas, Arizona, and Florida. Texas's Senate Bill 8, otherwise known as SB 8, which banned abortion care after 6 weeks and invited anti-abortion vigilantes to sue people who help someone get an abortion, that made seeking an abortion for immigrants living along the southern border nearly impossible almost a year before the Dobbs decision was made. So those barriers are only made worse as new laws and restrictions keep popping up in state after state.
Wow. So sad. So, Celine, what can we do as a community?
Well, there's lots that we can do, actually. First, I'm excited to share that the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, otherwise known as CMS, has launched both English and Spanish online portals that allow you to file a complaint if you or someone you know has been denied emergency care, including an abortion. Because of EMTALA, you cannot be denied treatment for an emergency medical condition based on whether or not you have health insurance, whether or not you can pay for treatment, or whether or not you're a US citizen. You also cannot be denied care based on your race, color, national origin, sex, religion, disability, or age. So we strongly encourage you to use these portals to file a complaint if you or someone you know has faced discrimination in a hospital emergency department. And I'm going to drop those links in English and Spanish right now in the chat. So that's one thing that you can do. At the Latina Institute, we also believe that each person has the right to decide if and when to become a parent. The courts absolutely do not speak for us, and no court or politician should dictate who can have children, when, how many, and under what circumstances. So throughout a pregnancy, a person's health and their well-being, not political interference, should guide important medical decisions. The Latina Institute works year-round to build power in Latinx communities, and we do this by building our activist base, called our Poderosas, by shaping state and federal policies, and by shifting culture to fuel a larger reproductive justice movement for health, dignity, and for justice. We also know that none of us lead monolithic lives, and all of you work and live across a range of identities and issues. And Latina Institute similarly doesn't work in silos. We work at the state, the local, and federal levels, and in partnership with a range of reproductive justice and immigrant rights organizations. You can find our state teams in New York, in Virginia, Texas, and Florida. And just like you, we remain grounded in community and in partnership, and anyone who wants to get involved can. Latina Institute has been investing in building out our national team as well, so that we can be more accessible to people beyond our core states. So we really invite you to connect with Latina Institute by signing up at latinainstitute.org or following us on TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, and X. Your support in sharing our message and engaging with our social media content is really crucial in raising awareness. You know, we know it will take all of us, and no action is too small. The more that you share with your community, with your family, with your friends, the more we can together fight misinformation, educate ourselves, and engage in the community.
Thank you so much. I'm going to switch to Spanish. Gracias, Seilen, por toda esta valiosa información acerca de estos dos casos tan importantes de la Corte Suprema y el impacto en nuestras comunidades, pero especialmente gracias por compartir todas las ideas de cómo podemos informarnos, educarnos y tomar acción. Ahora tendremos unos minutos para responder algunas preguntas que la audiencia haya compartido en el chat y quiero aprovechar para introducir a nuestra organizadora nacional, Sandra Pex, que está aquí con nosotros y no sé si Sandra me pueda apoyar en el chat para revisar si tenemos alguna pregunta.
Buenas tardes a todos. Hasta el momento no tenemos ninguna pregunta. Bienvenidos todos a preguntar.
Okay. ¿Alguna pregunta que tengan por ahí?
Ok, sí, llega la primera pregunta. ¿Dónde me puedo conectar con las personas de Florida?
Ok.
Pregunta Cindy Borrero.
Ok, gracias. Creo que lo que podemos hacer es tomar sus datos. Al final de la presentación estará apareciendo precisamente el correo electrónico de Sandra para que se pongan en contacto y ella podrá más adelante tener incluso un uno a uno con las personas que estén interesadas en tener más información, ¿verdad?
Claro que sí, invitados todos a preguntar. Mi nombre es Sandra, soy la organizadora nacional. Voy a dejar mi correo electrónico y mi número de teléfono. Se pueden contactar conmigo, hacer cualquier tipo de pregunta. Podemos tener una reunión uno a uno para responder cada una de sus preguntas y poderlas contactar con cada uno de los líderes de sus estados. ¿Vale? Por aquí tenemos una nueva pregunta. Sí, tenemos en Dallas, claro que sí, Melissa. Tenemos en Texas, estoy dejando mi correo electrónico y mi número de teléfono para que puedan hacerme las preguntas directamente y poder, como les dije anteriormente, conectarle con todas nuestras poderosas alrededor del país.
Gracias, Sandra. Tenemos unas preguntitas interesantes por aquí para Seilen. Seilen, ¿podrías explicarnos mejor cómo llega un caso a la Corte Suprema? Aunque ya vimos un ejemplo, pero algo más para explicar a más profundidad.
Yes, definitely. So it is confusing and it's a process. What in the most simple terms, what happens is there's an original complaint or lawsuit that goes to a federal district court. What happens then is that court decides one way or the other about the case. They actually make a decision. So they say yes or no. We think that this complaint, that there is a reason that this person was injured in some either physical or emotional way, and the law needs to be changed or they need to be compensated. So they make a decision. The party that loses, if you lose that case, and you're not happy with the fact that you lost that case, you get to appeal that case. What you do is you make an appeal to a higher level court. And so that's what's called a circuit court. And that court then takes the case and they hear arguments, they review everything that was submitted in the earlier case, they review additional information that's submitted by the different parties, and then they make a decision and they say either we agree with what the lower court said, or we disagree, or we agree in part, or we disagree in part. There's a whole spectrum of decisions they can make. But ultimately, if the person who made the appeal loses again, the circuit court says, no, we don't agree. We don't think that you have a case. We agree with the lower court that, you know, you shouldn't have had this case and you shouldn't win. Then that party, if they're still unhappy and they still really think they have a case, they can appeal one more time and submit a petition to the Supreme Court. So that's the very complicated term of certiorari. I'm going to get it wrong, but basically it's a petition to the Supreme Court that says, I think I have a case here. I think both of the lower courts were wrong. I think that this has big implications for not just me, but a lot of people. And so I think that it deserves to be heard by the highest court in the land, in the United States. The Supreme Court then accepts or denies that petition. As Dinora said, they get thousands and thousands of these petitions every year, and they only accept, you know, 70, 80, maybe 100 on a big year. They typically accept ones that they think will have really big impact, or that will have nationwide implications, or that really have to do with an important constitutional issue. So they accept or deny it. If they deny it, tough luck. You're out of luck and that's it. If they accept it though, then they can hear oral arguments. So both of the parties in the case, the losing party and the winning party, get to come and present their arguments again to the Supreme Court, and then the Supreme Court makes a decision. As I said earlier, for example, the two cases on abortion, they dismissed those cases. So they heard the cases and then they dismissed the cases. So the Supreme Court's decision can be a dismissal. It can also be a ruling. They can also say, we believe that there was a reason that you brought this case all the way here, and we actually think that we're going to make a ruling that could impact the law or could impact how future cases are decided in lower courts. So there's a lot of complication there, but hopefully that provides at least a more clear, or at least a more simplified picture of how a case ends up making its way to the Supreme Court and then what happens once it gets there.
Okay. Now it's more clear. Ok. Celine, tengo una pregunta que nos han hecho con anterioridad. ¿Quién decide qué casos son aceptados por el Tribunal Supremo?
Absolutely. So we mentioned that there are 9 justices, and 4 of the 9 justices have to vote to accept a case. So 4 out of 9 have to say, yes, we will take this case and hear it. Usually, as I mentioned, they only accept the case if it could have national significance, if they might be able to harmonize conflicting decisions in lower courts. If courts in different states this happens very often, courts in different states have made decisions that conflict with one another, the Supreme Court may say, okay, it's time for us to review this and make a decision once and for all. Or they could accept it if they think it's going to have value as setting precedent, essentially saying this is the standard by which all future cases should be judged. So if 4 of them agree and it sort of fits that loose criteria, then they're likely going to pick up the case. Ultimately, however, the true criteria are only within the minds of the Supreme Court justices. So we can understand a little bit of why they pick things, but ultimately it is up to them completely.
Thank you. Tenemos una última pregunta. No sé si haya, Sandra, haya otra pregunta en el chat. para pasar a la última pregunta que tengo, ¿no? Gracias. La última pregunta que tengo es si se aplica EMTALA solo a los beneficiarios de Medicaid o Medicare.
Yes, we get this question often, actually. So, EMTALA, which is about emergency medical care, it doesn't actually have to do with anyone's insurance. So, regardless of your insurance coverage, whether you have Medicaid, Medicare, private insurance, EMTALA guarantees that you must receive emergency medical treatment that is necessary, and that includes abortion. So the confusion usually comes because it is a federal law and it has to do with hospitals that receive federal funding. That is 99% of hospitals in the US. So it has to do with something technical about federal funding, but on the patient side, everybody, regardless of their type of insurance coverage, must receive emergency medical treatment under EMTALA. And based on the case and the decision, that should continue. However, we do know that there will be future attacks and we will have to fight those in the courts.
Okay.
I do see that there's a question for me in the chat. So if it's all right, I'll read that out. So Erica asked if I can tell everyone when the court will reconvene. So the court, Supreme Court convenes every October. That's when they begin their session. Every year, starting in October, the court convenes, they start to hear oral arguments. They will hear oral arguments actually all the way through May. So it's a long period where they will be hearing arguments and we can track which cases are going to be heard. Now, in terms of when they will actually release decisions, that's a little different. Technically, they can release a decision at any time between October and June. End of June, I should say, sorry. Beginning of October to the end of June. However, with really important cases and particularly very political cases, like cases that touch abortion, almost always, 99% of the time, they release those decisions at the very end of June. So both of the cases we talked about today, even though the oral arguments were done earlier in the year, they didn't release the decision until the last 2 weeks of June. We can expect that in the future. It's not a hard, fast rule. The justices can do whatever they want between October and the end of June. However, we feel very, very confident that they will continue to release cases that touch abortion at the end of June. What's helpful is they do release a calendar that is a little complicated to read, but it does say what days they will be hearing oral arguments and then what days they will be releasing decisions. So I will pull that up and I will drop that in the chat so that everyone can take a look and you can see they still have up this past term. So this term just ended at the end of June. They still have that calendar up so you can take a look and see a little bit of how that works. But the next term will begin in October of 2024. And that's when they will start meeting again, start hearing arguments, and actually start convening to decide cases for the following year.
Gracias, Seilen. Gracias, Erika. Muy buena pregunta y muy buen comentario. Y bueno, pues estamos ya casi terminando con este evento y solamente nos queda darles las gracias y recordarles que en Latina Institute creemos que cada persona tiene derecho a decidir si quiere ser madre, padre y cuándo. Cuando las personas pueden tomar decisiones que son mejores para sus vidas, las familias prosperan y construimos comunidades donde cada uno de nosotros puede participar con dignidad e igualdad. Y antes de finalizar, queremos compartir con ustedes dos fechas muy importantes para que las tomen en cuenta y las puedan apartar por ahí. Este mes, el 24, a la misma hora de 5:30 tiempo central, 6:30 tiempo este, tendremos un evento que se llama Fundamentos, Latina Institute y la Justicia Reproductiva. Y posteriormente en agosto, el 14 de agosto, para ser exactos, tendremos un evento que se llama Latinx Fe y Aborto. Les invitamos a permanecer en contacto con nosotros para las fechas posteriores, los eventos que ya tenemos agosto, septiembre, para seguir cultivando esta relación y ser parte de este movimiento. Y antes de terminar, de concluir este evento, les queremos agradecer su participación en este espacio y les quiero pedir su apoyo contestando esta encuesta. Voy a agregarla. Ok, si me pueden apoyar en el chat, por favor. La información presentada en esta sesión fue nueva para ti. Si pueden poner en el chat, sí, dice Elena, gracias. Gracias, gracias. Erika, no es nueva la información, qué bueno. Gracias. Muchas gracias por sus respuestas. Y la segunda, gracias. Yes. Gracias, Cindy, Anaita y Heidi. La segunda preguntita es, ¿ha sido clara toda la información que has recibido? Si nos pueden compartir en el chat. Yes, gracias, gracias. Muchas gracias por su participación. Nos da mucho gusto que esta información haya sido de su interés y que haya sido clara sobre todo. Pues muchas gracias, gracias por participar con nosotros en este evento. Les invitamos a seguirnos en nuestras redes sociales para estar al día de todo el trabajo del Latina Institute a nivel nacional, a nivel estatal y la información de nuestros próximos eventos. Seguiremos luchando por un mundo en el que todas las personas tengan derecho a elegir lo que hacen con su propio cuerpo y a recibir la atención de salud reproductiva que consideren necesaria. En su pantalla está apareciendo la información de mi colega Sandra Pex, su correo electrónico donde nos pueden contactar para tener más información o si tienen más preguntas. Muchas gracias por estar en este espacio. Gracias a nuestro equipo de interpretación y gracias Seilen y Sandra por este evento.